The year is 1953. The world is on the brink of nuclear annihilation. The American public and the global population live in fear of hearing sirens at any moment and seeing the sky burn with the magnificent shade of the apocalypse itself. If nuclear war was inevitable, then what would happen to those unlucky enough to survive? The show must go on, right? That's what the US government set out to determine when they began Project Sunshine, a series of top-secret tests to determine how a human body would react to and possibly survive nuclear fallout. But what did they test on exactly? The answer is like something straight out of Fallout. Welcome back to Dark Frontier. While the US government and adjacent organizations are known for their eyebrow-raising experiments throughout the years, nothing quite comes close to the unprecedented studies carried out by the Rand Corporation, Atomic Energy Commission, and elite hospitals and colleges at the behest of the United States government to study the effects of nuclear radiation on humankind. Tests on pregnant women, inmates, and even infants, living and dead. The sky opened and the world changed forever on July 16th, 1945, when the first nuclear explosion occurred in Los Alamos, New Mexico, during Robert J. Oppenheimer's Trinity test. Ahead of the US government's planned nuclear attack on Hiroshima and Nagasaki to end the war against the Empire of Japan once and for all. Just 1 month later, on August 6, 1945, the first atomic bomb would drop. 80,000 souls in Hiroshima, Japan would be snuffed out in an instant at 8:15 in the morning by the payload of the Enola Gay. One minister who survived the blast said, "The feeling I had was that everyone was dead. The whole city was destroyed. I thought this was the end of Hiroshima, of Japan, of humankind. This was God's judgment on man." 3 days later, on August 9th, 40,000 more men, women, and children in Nagasaki would be obliterated by the B-29 aircraft named Boxcar, carrying death upon its wings in the form of the nuclear bomb Fat Man. Dr. Tatsuichiro Akizuki, a witness to the Nagasaki bombing, recounted, "It seemed as if the earth itself emitted fire and smoke, flames that writhed up and erupted from underground. The sky was dark, the ground was scarlet, and in between hung clouds of yellowish smoke. 3 kinds of color, black, yellow, and scarlet, loomed ominously over the people who ran about like so many ants seeking to escape. It seemed like the end of the world." 6 days later, Japan unconditionally surrendered, ending World War II. The power of the atom had been unleashed, the genie was out of the bottle, and the world was changed irreversibly, forever. Following the end of World War II, the US government established the United States Atomic Energy Commission, or AEC, to foster and control nuclear energy and weaponry during peacetime. In 1946, President Harry S. Truman signed the McMahon-Atomic Energy Act, effectively transferring the control of atomic energy from military to civilian hands, at least in the public eye. This gave the AEC complete control of the plants, laboratories, equipment, and personnel assembled during the war to produce the atomic bomb. In August 1949, the Soviet Union would plunge the world into paranoia and fear, with their first successful detonation of a nuclear weapon, First Lightning, at a bombing range in Kazakhstan. This was 3 whole years ahead of when US intelligence predicted the Soviets would have the technology to even assemble such a weapon, let alone to successfully detonate one. The United States pushed ahead on a new type of nuclear weapon, the atom bomb. The early 1950s would see the US government begin a series of devastating tests at a site codenamed Castle Bravo, a testing site on Bikini Atoll in the Marshall Islands. Soon they would make massive advancements in the field of thermonuclear devastation. The Soviets responded in kind with more bombs of their own. As the threat of nuclear war increases worldwide, so too do the United States government's questions surrounding it. Gabriel was an investigation conducted by the Atomic Energy Commission as a way to determine and gauge the impact of nuclear fallout. Project Gabriel was born in 1949 and served as the AEC's first steps towards sunshine. Through the early 1950s, the AEC argued that their findings during Project Gabriel to test the atmosphere around Japan and the Castle Bravo sites concluded that nuclear particles in the air posed no immediate threat to mankind. Their initial hypothesis was, well, wrong. The AEC partnered with the RAND Corporation, a research and development entity that began in the late 1940s as an offshoot of Boeing to develop weapons and technology for warfare. In 1948, the RAND Corporation achieved nonprofit status as an independent organization. The RAND Corporation would meet with members of the AEC at a conference held in the summer of 1953, with representatives from Harvard, Stanford, Princeton, and Cornell universities, as well as Air Research and Development Command, the California Institute of Technology, the Naval Radiological Defense Lab, the U.S. Weather Bureau, and a plethora of other experts from more than 40 other organizations and universities across the United States. The purpose of the conference? To determine the effect nuclear weapons could have on humans. In the summary of the conference by the RAND Corporation, dated August 6, 1953, the following is stated. The preliminary report discusses the various aspects of long-range contamination due to the detonation of large numbers of nuclear devices. An improvised methodology for assessing the human hazard is developed, and an extensive experimental program is proposed. The report notes that in man's pursuit of new means to wage war, the non-combatant casualties have now extended from temporary to long-term, with the concept of nuclear fallout. This is when the wordplay begins that is both objectively true and a menacing warning of what's to come. Young and growing tissue is most susceptible to radiation damage. Bone formation in an individual is complete by the time he is 20, although mineral exchange occurs the rest of his life. The report went on to detail their proposal for sampling and research, giving 6 areas suggested for investigation, based on a previous study called Project Ivy, which, as an experiment, treated certain non-harmful elements as hypothetical nuclear fallout stemming from a hypothetical bomb site. These 6 areas were northern Utah or southwest Idaho, selected as representing an area of maximum fallout, Kansas or Iowa, lesser fallout but important for grain growing, New England, less fallout but an area where considerable information is readily available on radioactive contamination of rain, streams, and reservoirs, South America, an area in the southern hemisphere, England, an area where northern hemisphere exposure should be very low, and Japan, because excellent arrangements are presently in effect there for obtaining human specimens of all age groups. Then, too, the Japanese specimens will represent a much longer exposure time and will also provide an opportunity to observe any effects of different diets and living habitats on the concentration of fallout in humans. The samples sought were 12 samples of human material, with samples from 0 to 10 years old, 10 to 20, and over 20, bone and teeth samples, 10 livestock samples for young and mature animals, as well as bone and teeth, 8 foodstuff samples, cow milk, feces, eggshells, and other goods from local farms, 3 samples of water, and 3 samples of soil. The total number of each area's sample would be 36, for a worldwide total of 216. They had a goal. Now they had to achieve it. Believe it or not, Dark Frontier has a goal too. Although this one doesn't involve harvesting body parts yet. It involves bringing you the darkest, strangest, true stories from across the internet. You don't want to be left out. Follow us into the Dark Frontier by liking this video, subscribing to our channel, and ringing that notification bell. Project Sunshine would officially begin in 1955. Together, the United States Department of Energy and the UK Atomic Energy Authority collected over 1,500 cadavers from half a dozen countries across the globe, attempting to study the impact of strontium-90, a key radioactive chemical, if absorbed by human skin during nuclear assault. Documents relating to the project were declassified in April 1994. One of which was the program's research memorandum from the 1954 conference. The document stated that a number of experimental data, particularly those of the baby sampling program of the University of Chicago, had become available. This small meeting was attended by several representatives from the AEC, Department of Agriculture, U.S. Air Force, Rand Corporation, Weather Bureau, and the New England Deaconess Hospital. While most of the declassified and scanned documents are nearly incomprehensible and faded, intentionally or not, the truly disturbing numbers that followed were quite clear. 66 dead babies, stillborn or born prematurely, ranging from 40 weeks to 4, furnished from Chicago. Harvard supplied adult ribs, ages unknown, and children's ribs, ages 7 to 6 days old. Columbia University provided zoological samples, calves and clams. Renowned nuclear pathologist Shields Warren furnished samples, including the vertebral columns and ribs of children ages 7 to 8 weeks old. He had collected from Massachusetts, Ohio, Maine, and New Hampshire. He'd also collected adult legs from the same area. Dr. E.W. Galt, from the Christian Medical College and Hospital in Vellore, South India, provided 6 stillborn skeletons to the program, as did J.Z. Bowers from the University of Utah. Cheese, milk, rain, river water, egg, and soil samples from all across the globe were also submitted. The continued particulars of Sunshine were lost to time until June 1995, when President Bill Clinton released classified documents to the Advisory Committee on Human Radiation Experiments. That year, in a documentary entitled Deadly Experiments, a British mother of a stillborn baby recounted the horrific story of having her baby's legs removed by hospital doctors in the name of Project Sunshine. I asked if I could put her christening robe on her, but I wasn't allowed to, and that upset me terribly because she wasn't christened. No one asked me about doing things like that, taking bits and pieces from her. A spokesperson for the UK Atomic Energy Authority told ABC News in 2001 that while they had not found records of bodies or body parts being sent to the US from the UK, the fact that there was over 50 years worth of information scattered across several countries and entities made it extremely difficult to verify much. Also, through 2001, the full international extent of Sunshine was revealed to the world after a British newspaper had reported on the fact that British scientists obtained children's body parts and shipped their bones and more to the US. The Australian Ministry for Health and Aged Care then launched an investigation of their own into reports of Australian samples being used in sunshine without the parents' permission. In Hong Kong, an inquiry was launched there as well. But the brighter the sunshine, the darker the shade. Clinton's advisory committee and their findings opened the floodgates and let the disturbing truth of human experimentation through the 50s and 60s spill out. And sunshine was only the beginning. Immediately following World War II, researchers at Vanderbilt University in Tennessee, who would later attend the Sunshine meetings, gave over 900 pregnant mothers vitamin drinks to improve the health of their babies. You can guess what that really meant. The textbook of research ethics, published in 2000, explored the nutrition study, noting, "These nutrition cocktails were actually laced with radioactive iron to determine how quickly and harmfully these elements would be absorbed into the placenta. 4 babies died outright, and an undisclosed number of the women developed various cancers and detriments, including hair and tooth loss, as well as rashes and bruises." From 1946 to 1953, the Walter E. Fernald State School in Waltham, Massachusetts, partnered with Quaker Oats on a science club for 70 mentally disabled children. What these children didn't know was that they weren't conducting the fun experiments, they were the experiment. Quaker Oats and the school had another collaborator in this function, the Atomic Energy Commission. The children were fed oatmeal containing radioactive calcium and isotopes to determine how radioactive nutrients were digested and how it would affect the body. Consent forms sent to the parents never mentioned the nature of the experiment, and an ethicist who remained unnamed told Wayne D. LeBaron, author of America's Nuclear Legacy, which covered several of these experiments, that the children may not have been harmed, but surely they had been wounded. He then added, "Of course, that depends on how you define harm." The full extent and impact of these experiments was never fully realized, but the families were compensated with a $1.8 million settlement from Quaker and MIT in 1998. Unfortunately, the incident with the science club was not the last set of experiments done at the school. In 1956, 3 years after the science club experiment, researchers gave mentally disabled children radioactive calcium orally and intravenously. They also injected chemicals into malnourished infants, then collected fluids from their brains and spines. Between 1960 and 1971, the Department of Defense had a new study pool: financially struggling and African American cancer patients. They were promised a new experimental treatment to cure cancer, something many had trouble battling as it was due to their financial standing or the racial politics of the time. They were receiving something all right, high doses of radiation, to once again study the effects. One doctor in the experiment was worried about litigation, rightfully so, and only referred to the patients by initials and never by full names, so that there would be no feasible way to connect them to the study. Over 90 patients were treated with this method. For over 10 years, between 1963 and 1973, Dr. Carl Heller performed experiments on inmates in Washington and Oregon, testing the effect radiation had on men's testicles on behalf of the Atomic Energy Commission. These inmates were promised a reduction on their sentence and $5 per radiation session. They would also be paid $25 per biopsy and $100 upon the treatment's completion. To anyone's knowledge, these inmates never received reduced sentences. Completion was a term used loosely as well, but in Heller's mind it meant sterilization. Heller was quoted as saying he sterilized the men after the experiments to prevent them contaminating the world with radiation-induced mutants. The inmates were exposed to 650 rads, which is 650 times the amount of a chest X-ray. Dr. Joseph Hamilton, who assisted Heller in his experiments, stated that Heller had a bit of the Buchenwald touch. Buchenwald being the infamous concentration camp, notorious for macabre human experimentation. Another example of prisoners being used came from the University of Washington in the 1960s, also focused on irradiating the testicles of prisoners, 230 of them to be exact. When these inmates later left prison and had children, at least 4 of them had offspring born with birth defects, according to researcher Andrew Golishek, a physiologist from North Carolina A&T University, who wrote the 2003 nonfiction book In the Name of Science. The exact number is unknown, because researchers never followed up on the status of any of the subjects. While no official publications or entities have seemed to collect or disclose the complete scope of Project Sunshine's experiments, it's evident that the bodies left out in the sun were just scratching the surface. There's no exact date of Sunshine's ending either, other than that a majority of the records were declassified in the mid-1950s, albeit with information that was heavily redacted. The AEC was officially disbanded in 1975, in name only, becoming what is today the Nuclear Regulatory Committee, operating at an annual budget in 2021 of $880 million. Of course, a new name and a loftier budget hasn't exactly helped. Since the 1970s, the NRC has been the subject of numerous controversies of their own, including an undercover investigation in 2007 where the Government Accountability Office posed as a would-be terrorist organization to obtain a license from the NRC to purchase various nuclear materials for bomb making. They were approved for the purchase without the NRC even visiting their location or verifying their legitimacy. They were also given a license, which they easily modified to allow for an increased yield to acquire. When the news broke, the NRC simply stated that it didn't consider the potential weapon a huge threat, noting that a bomb made from the materials would only be enough to contaminate an area the size of a city block. The NRC also came under fire for major oversights regarding the 2011 Fukushima nuclear disaster in Japan, and subsequent whistleblowers and publicly released documents revealed that 1/3 of nuclear reactors in the US were, like Fukushima, potentially exposed to the possibility of devastating flooding and subsequent meltdowns. There are no current records of any further experiments from the NRC or any government agencies. Maybe they gathered enough data to conclude their experiments, or maybe they just got better at hiding them.